All right, welcome to House Education on March 3rd. We're going to get a presentation on the committee bill we've been developing. Before that, I just want to make sure everybody is good with the budget memo. Just a good sense of consensus here. I'm not hearing any objections. All right, I'm going to go forward with it. Great. All right, we're going to turn our attention now quickly. I know that everybody's got various scheduling issues here. And today is really just a presentation, not a debate, ask some clarifying questions. So what I've tried to do in working with Ledge Council is to create a bill that sort of takes in some of the conversations that we've been having, takes in some of the conversations I've had with advocates. And I sort of was thinking about it, have it reflect some sort of overall values. One is to essentially, state that, Vermont is not in favor, supports our anti-discrimination policies. So it sort of restates restates the Public Accommodations Act and how schools must comply with it, and the Vermont Fair Employment Practices Act. And that is there to make the statement, but also to sort of make it clear that we support the work that the State Board of Education has done in their rules, which also includes those. The second sort of value that we have in there is that, we have taken a look at this system and have thought about the capacity of the Agency of Education to provide oversight. And so that one of the themes here is sort of better oversight, especially when we talk about accreditation. I think one of the things we heard is, and it really started when Representative Williams said, we send these kids off and we don't know what happens to them. And I think we've heard a call for better communication between the districts that are sending students to by public dollar tuition to schools to find out how those students are doing on a basis that is essentially standard and required. It also sort of, I think, is stating the value that the town tuition program is to educate students who don't otherwise have access to a public school nearby to be educated nearby. Now, I think that's stated in the provision that talks about a radius around the state where the money is to travel. It's sort of saying that this program is not designed to be subsidizing education far from the state of Vermont. And then you'll see in there that there is a pause on approval of further independent schools until the legislature says otherwise. And I think that this is really to state that the tuition program was never intended to sort of create a private school proliferation or industry, but rather to educate students under the obligations that we have in the Constitution of Vermont. And that perhaps a pause during a reevaluation would be in order. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Beth to kind of walk us through what's there. And again, like I said, this is really to get it out in the public, but also to contemplate for all of us over the break.
Great, thank you. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So you all should have draft 1.1 with the date of 2/13 on it. 22 pages. Are we all looking at the same thing? Great. This bill is entitled An Act Relating to the Eligibility of Approved Independent Schools to Receive Public Tuition. And the first section on page 2 is the findings and purpose section. Do you want me to go over these or in the interest of time, skip to the meat of the bill?
I suppose we probably should skip to the meat of the bill.
Okay. I will note there's a placeholder on page 3, line 6. I believe there was discussion at some point about including a finding related to the amount of public funds that are currently going to independent schools. I don't have that number. So I just put the placeholder there. You can remove it, or if you want to add it, we can talk about how to get that information.
I just want to let people know JFO is sort of trying to work on that number.
Oh, great. Okay. Do you want me to, for purposes of going to draft 2.1, should we get there, do you want me to leave this placeholder in or take it out? Leave it in. Okay. So on page 3, section 2, you'll see a reader assistants heading there, approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. So section 2 is a proposed amendment to section 166 of Title 16, which is the approved and recognized independent school statute. So this is the statute under which the approved independent school laws and recognized independent school laws live. So these are all the processes and things the state board has to either do or find in order to approve or recognize a school, and then any obligations the approved or recognized school has to report that back to the state board. So you'll notice on page 3, lines 18 through 19, 18 through the end of the page, and then continuing on through page 8, line 8 on page 4, there's language that's struck through. This is language that would go into effect or will go into effect on July 1, 2023, and is a result of Act 173. This is the language requiring independent schools, approved independent schools, if they want to accept or be eligible to accept public tuition, they have to agree to accept students on an IEP if they're placed there by their IEP team. This language stays in this draft, it's just moved elsewhere. So what we're doing on page 5, I included a little bit more language than I would normally include of current law, just to orient everyone to kind of what the current law currently says. So you'll notice that I kept on page 4, line 20, I kept subdivision B5 here, and this is just, this draft does not make any changes to it, but I just wanted you all to see the state board's current powers and authority for revoking, suspending, or imposing conditions on an approved independent school. So it's just there for conversation purposes. This bill doesn't propose to make any changes to it at this point. Page 5 is really the heart of what you all have been discussing here. So starting on line 10, this is what the state board, this is the section. So we're adding subdivision 9 to subsection B, and subsection B, you can see on page 3, is all about what the state board has to find, or things that approved independent schools have to report back to the state board in order to maintain their approval status. So section on page 5, line 10, subdivision 9 is adding a whole host of new requirements. And those are the requirements you all have been talking about. So it says an approved independent school that intends to accept public tuition shall be approved by the state board as eligible to receive public tuition only on the condition that the school complies with the following requirements. And you'll see that the first requirement there on line 14 is that language from Act 173 that's struck out earlier. So that's current law, current requirement. We're just moving it now. There's more things. This bill proposes more things for an approved independent school has to do. So rather than have this section be standalone, we're just incorporating it in with everything else. So page 6, line 1 is the first new addition here. So in order to be eligible to receive public tuition, the first thing, aside from language in current law regarding accepting students on an IEP, is that the school has to be accredited by the Association of Independent Schools in New England or the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Second new addition is that the school agrees to report 3 or more unexcused absences by a student attending the school on public tuition to the student's local education agency not later than the next business day after the 3rd unexcused absence. On line 8, the school agrees to report the academic progress of students attending the school on public tuition to the school's local education agency at an interval determined by and in a format approved by the agency. Line 11, the school has adopted and implemented policies and procedures to comply with the Vermont Public Accommodations Act and the Vermont Fair Employment Practices Act. Line 15, the school attests on or before August 1st of each year to compliance with all statutory requirements for approved independent schools and the board's rules for approved independent schools on a form created by the agency including documentation of the following. Line 19. They have to attest that they have a statement of non-discrimination posted on the school's website and included in the school's application materials that is consistent with the Vermont Public Accommodations Act and the Fair Employment Practices Act. And an assurance signed by the head of the school that the school complies with the Vermont Public Accommodations Act in all aspects of the school's admissions and operations. Any questions thus far?
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I'm wondering in that section if we would also want to have expulsion, as.
We're just going to ask clarifying questions today, and
Okay.
we'll save the longer discussion
Okay.
about how we might want to modify for the
Okay,
time when we come
yeah.
back. Yes.
When they use the word consistent in Vermont, does that mean that if it's an out-of-state school, as long as they're consistent with the rules or regulations that's set by Vermont?
That's a great question. So you are looking at the language, let's see. You're looking at line 20 on page 6, right?
Yep.
So I think this is an area where you may want to discuss further, but there is going to be a separate section for out-of-state schools that addresses that. And when we get there, well, whenever you decide to have that conversation, we can have that conversation, but it might make more sense after you see that language to talk about my advice to you and kind of what your options are there. But yes, we'll get there. So those are the requirements that you all have been talking about. Those would be added to, so an approved independent school could still be an approved independent school in Vermont if they didn't do these things. They just wouldn't be eligible for public tuition. And we can talk about why there might be, what does that mean for those kind of two different categories? Ultimately, it's a policy decision for y'all. Page 7, line 6, we're adding here that there's no private right of action is created by this subdivision 9 against an approved independent school approved by the state board as eligible to receive public tuition for failure to comply with any of the requirements of this subdivision. So what that's saying is if an approved independent school is not following something, let's say it didn't report the academic progress of its students. A parent couldn't sue the school. This section doesn't give the parent an independent basis to sue the approved independent school for not reporting the academic compliance. The state board, so on line 9, page 7, the state board is authorized to use its powers under subdivision 5, which is what I pointed out. I kept that language in the beginning that we haven't proposed any changes to at this point. To revoke, suspend, or impose conditions on the eligibility of an approved independent school to receive public tuition for failure to comply with these requirements. The board shall establish and maintain a process to receive, investigate, and resolve allegations of noncompliance with these requirements in a manner that provides due process for the person or persons making the allegation and the approved independent school against which the allegation is made. And that a person shall not coerce, threaten, interfere, or otherwise discriminate against any individual who alleges noncompliance with the requirements under this subdivision 9. Any questions on this language?
Representative Bus.
Can you tell me again, can you just say it in your words one more time?
For this whole section or the top part that I talked about? So if an approved independent school fails to comply with any of the new requirements you're creating under the we're just going to say subdivision 9 is what we're talking about. That in and of itself does not create an independent basis for a parent to sue the school and say, you didn't follow the third requirement, and therefore I am entitled to some sort of remedy here.
Okay.
What they can do is what they can already do under state law, and that's make a complaint to the state board, and then the state board holds the power to make some decision or make some move based on the non-compliance.
Right, do we clarify what they do if there's non-compliance, or that's the state board?
That's under subdivision 5. That's why I left that language in there, so you all could see what they currently can do. And that is, so if you want to look at page 4. So they can suspend, they can revoke, suspend or impose conditions after having provided an opportunity for a hearing. And then if they were to revoke or suspend the school's approval status, students have to go somewhere else so they're not truant. And then this new law says that they can remove that, they can suspend, revoke, or condition that eligibility for public tuition for noncompliance. They have to have a process for making that determination, for investigating it, and then for resolving it. This language does not in any way mean that if there is already an independent basis in law for someone to enforce their rights for this non-compliance, they can assert their rights under that independent basis. For example, if they feel as though they have been discriminated against, there's already a process in law for them to assert those rights. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. And then I just also kept this in because I think I mentioned it once and it's just something we glanced over on page 8. This is current law. This is part of the approved independent school section. Current law already requires an approved independent school that accepts students for whom the district pays tuition to use the assessment or assessments required under section 164, which is it's the state board's general powers and duties section, and subdivision 9 is standards for student performance section. So there's already a requirement in law that approved independent schools have to use the assessment or assessments required under this state board section to measure attainment of standards for student performance in those sections, and they have to provide that data to the secretary. So it's not exactly what you're trying to get at with the student performance report back to the home district, but there is already something that contemplates some amount of information sharing. So I just wanted to highlight that. The next section, page 8, you'll see a new reader assistance heading labeled tuition. And so these are going to be individual amendments. There's a new section for each statute to chapter 21, which is what we talk about when we talk about the town tuition program. So these individual statutes, all in the 800s that we're about to look at quickly, are what constitute the town tuition program sections of law. And the amendments here, except for the one we'll get to about out-of-state schools, are all essentially conforming amendments. So you'll see we're not changing this bill doesn't change the school district's ability to tuition kids out. It doesn't change the choice of the family. It's still the family's choice, but they're limited in their choice now to an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. You'll see those 5 words inserted throughout these sections. So section 821 on page 8 is the authority for a school district to either maintain an elementary school or tuition out their students. And under current law, they can go to any approved independent school anywhere. And now it's saying you can go to any approved independent school that's eligible to receive public tuition. And it's the same conforming amendment throughout here. So on page 9, section 4, section 822 is the high school equivalent of what we just talked about. And again, you'll see on line 8 that the school district can pay tuition to a public high school, an approved independent high school eligible to receive public tuition, or an approved independent school meeting education quality standards. And you'll notice that the language here on line 10 through 11, at the very end of line 10, current law says within or outside the state. because currently tuition can go anywhere. But this bill limits that to just schools that were within, I believe, 25 miles of the Vermont border in the United States. And you'll see where that's reflected later on. So again, anywhere you're going to see, for example, on page 10, section 5, this section addresses how tuition is paid for elementary schools. And again, you'll see on line 6, there's really no change here except just clarifying that the tuition can be paid only to an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. Same amendment here on same page, section 6, line 17 through 18. Again, they're paying an amount not to exceed the average announced tuition for the year of attendance for its students enrolled in an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. Page 11 is the designation section, section 7. This does not change the designation process in any way. It again, just it's the same limitation. School districts can designate an approved independent school to serve as the public high school of their district, but it has to be a school that's eligible to receive public tuition.
Can I ask a question? So it says to designate 3 or fewer. Is that what it is right now? Okay.
Any language you see here that's not underlined is current law.
Is current.
And then on page, any questions? I'm just kind of skipping over because it's the same amendment each time. Page 12, I propose you strike subsection E here, which is a carve out for school districts that I believe no longer exist. Page 13, section 8, section 828. Here's where we get to schools located outside of Vermont. So this section is tuition to approved schools. That's the name of the title. That's the name of the statute. And so you'll see that a school, so it basically lists the types of schools that can accept public tuition or that tuition can be paid to. So if we're looking at line 3, a school district shall not pay tuition, this is all current law, to a student except to a public school, an approved independent school, stop right there, that's current law, where this bill proposes to add located in Vermont. And then we're going to continue with current law, an independent school meeting education quality standards, a tutorial program approved by the state board, an approved education program, new addition, a therapeutic school, and you'll see that we define that. That's already a concept that exists, just without a definition in law right now. We're going to continue on with current law on line 6 at the very end there, or an independent school in another state. Current law says or country. This bill proposes to eliminate public tuition from going out of country and limit the another state part to located within 25 miles of the Vermont border. And then this is current law approved under the laws of that state. And then the rest of that statute is not really necessary for us to talk about for today's conversation. Line 14 proposes to add specific language about requirements for independent schools in another state. Oh, that shouldn't say country. I'll take care of that for the next draft. So an independent school in another state located within 25 miles of the Vermont border that is approved under the laws of that state is eligible to receive public tuition if the following conditions are met. And as I'm sitting here and thinking about this, you're probably going to want to incorporate, or you should consider incorporating some of the requirements in subdivision 9 and think about which ones you want those to be into this section. But because Vermont law does not apply to people and businesses outside of the state of Vermont, right? Every state has their own law. How do you get at the, if you want schools that are located outside of the state to be eligible to receive public tuition, and if your goal is to require some non-discrimination protections, how do you do that? This is what I am proposing you do. And that is to say that the independent school has adopted and implemented policies and procedures to comply with all anti-discrimination laws applicable to public schools in the state where the independent school is located, and makes reasonable efforts to enforce those policies and procedures, even if those laws by their terms do not apply to the independent school. And then on page 14, requiring posting and maintaining on the website its policy to comply with the anti-discrimination laws in that state.
I just would throw this out there. Would it be helpful to specify for both students and employees?
You can. So if you're talking about the border, within 25 miles of the border, you know which states you're talking about. You know, you're talking about Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New York.
Canada?
Canada's a country. So that's a policy decision for you all. You could do that. I believe there are students, especially in the Northeast Kingdom, who go across the border now. But this bill limits it to the United States.
And what about technical schools that kids are crossing the border? Does that apply to the independent school as well? Because I'm thinking there's McCann's, they go across to Massachusetts, which is a technical school. You know, automotive and other things, along with the regular classes.
That's a really good question. This doesn't limit for public schools. So if the technical school is a public school, this doesn't limit in any way the current status quo for public school tuition. The geographical limitation is only applicable to an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. So if the program you're talking about is an approved independent school, if they are located within 25 miles of the border, this would, and then follow everything else you want them to follow, this would sweep them in. Options here. You could add language that says something to the effect of, they're only eligible for public tuition if they follow their own state's anti-discrimination laws, and those laws are at least as protective as the state of Vermont. That's going to require a subjective analysis by the state board.
I guess I would say, the committee, you can disagree if you like, but given who our neighbors are, I'm comfortable with saying that they need to follow their own state's anti-discrimination laws.
And then again, I would encourage you, and this will be a very easy drafting addition for me, is if there are parts of that subdivision 9 that we talked about, like accreditation, the reporting requirements, all that, we can sweep those in.
I think we should tweak those.
Yep.
Intent.
It would be everything other than the Vermont non-discrimination laws. Okay.
I mean, you can, I would say use your judgment. If you can't sort of require a form or whatever.
You could certainly require them to report back. Yep. And then sections 9 on page 14 and section 10 are just some, I don't want to say fancy because it's not fancy, technical drafting issues. There's an amendment to this section 828 on tuition to approved independent schools that doesn't come into effect until July 1, 2024. That's some reporting back requirements. So just for drafting purposes, if your bill goes into effect on July 1, 2023, there has to be like multiple sections of this to reflect the law as it would appear in each iteration of it. And I'm happy to speak individually with you if you want on the technical pieces of that, but that's why section 828 appears here multiple times. Page 15, dual enrollment. Current law says, well, you can see what current law says. We're not really changing anything here, other than on line 17, making it really clear that in order to participate in the dual enrollment program, a student has to be, if they're in an independent school, it has to be an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition, in Vermont, to which the student's district of residence pays publicly funded tuition on behalf of the student. So this really isn't changing current law really at all, other than the limiting requirement that it's an independent school eligible to receive public tuition. Special education, we're on page 16. Section 12, this bill proposes to add a new statute. So Section 11, you will all become very familiar with Section 11 at the beginning of Title 16. This is the kind of master definition section for all of Title 16. You'll find separate little definitions sprinkled throughout Title 16, but unless it says otherwise, almost all of the definitions in Section 11 apply throughout the whole title. And so here we're proposing adding a new definition. The concept, so a therapeutic approved independent school means an approved independent school that limits enrollment to students who are on an individualized education program or plan under Section 504, who are enrolled pursuant to a written agreement between the local education agency and the school. So this concept already exists and it's already happening. And in fact, the state board's amendment to, or their 2200 series rules on approved independent school eligibility actually use this define therapeutic schools. And so this is just an easy way to refer to therapeutic schools, right? Anytime you're looking for an easy way to refer to a concept, let's define the concepts. Then we only have to use that term rather than having to repeat the concept over and over. So this concept of a therapeutic school already exists. It's just the term therapeutic school doesn't appear anywhere in Title 16. So we're adding it here. So special education on Section 13 at the very bottom of page 16, the language appears on page 17. So this section talks about extraordinary special education reimbursement. And I'm not prepared to get into exactly what extraordinary special education reimbursement is for the purposes of today's conversation. But I want to draw your attention to, again, this is kind of a conforming amendment here related to Act 173. So remember, Act 173 says approved independent schools can only be eligible to receive public tuition if they agree to accept students on an IEP. And then there were some funding changes along with that on how the approved independent schools could be reimbursed for those students. And that's part of those funding choices, funding decisions or methods appear in this extraordinary special education reimbursement section. And so we're making a conforming change here that says that the public school the approved independent school has to be eligible to receive public tuition if they're going to qualify for this special reimbursement rate. And then Section 14 on page 17, Section 2973, there's actually a specific statute in the special education chapter that talks about independent school tuition rates. And so again, this is language from Act 173 in the subsection A here, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, an approved independent school that accepts public tuition has to enroll a student on an IEP. Again, we're adding that language is eligible to receive public tuition. And then this is all current law. Moving on to page 19. Still in this section about tuition, just to approved independent schools regarding special education. Here's where the concept of therapeutic approved independent schools already lives. So the secretary shall set, after consultation with independent schools in Vermont, the maximum tuition rates to be paid by the agency and supervisory unions to, and then you'll see the language that's crossed out here is the definition of therapeutic approved independent schools. So they have their own, the tuition is calculated differently for them than other approved independent schools. Those are the changes to current law. The rest of the bill, the last couple pages, are several provisions of things you want done, pieces of section law. So you'll see another reader assistance heading called forms and report. So section 15 is asking AOE on or before January 15th, 2024, to create a standard form for public and approved independent schools to report the academic progress of tuition students to the student's local LEA or to the LEA, as well as how often academic progress shall be reported. And then in developing that form, the AOE has to consult with certain groups. So this is the requirement in subdivision 9, that there's that sharing of academic progress, how that's done and what specific data you want. You're delegating that to AOE to come up with a way to do that. Compliance attestation on line 20 on page 19. So on or before September 1st, 2024, the Agency of Education shall create an attestation form to be used by, moving on to page 20, approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition to certify annual compliance with all statutory requirements for approved independent schools and the board's rules for approved independent schools.
Okay, interrupt for a moment. I know members of the committee, some of you need to drift that away. Just feel free to do so as needed.
So you're asking AOE to come up with that attestation form. And then subsection C here on page 20, in conjunction with developing the compliance attestation form, the agency shall review all policies public schools are required to adopt and make a written recommendation to the House and Senate Committees on Education regarding whether any such policy is not already applicable, should also apply to approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. And they should submit that report no later than December 1st, 2023. I just, again, want to give my pitch here to be very specific in the term you use. Policies are just that. They're, you know, think of like the mascot policy, hazing, harassment, and bullying policy. So if that is all you are interested in capturing, I think the term policy is sufficient. But if you are interested in having a larger, more systemic review of every provision of law that's applicable to public schools, such as the requirement to follow education quality standards, teacher licensing, just a broader application of law to public schools, then policies is not going to cover that. So again, I would just make sure you are specific in the word you use there.
I think for the purposes of how you've written it, we were talking specifically about
Policies. Okay, great. Transitions. So this could potentially be a big change. So how do you deal with the transition to these proposed changes? Section 16 on page 20, line 14, an approved independent school that intends to accept public tuition that is not accredited by the Association of Independent Schools in New England or the New England Association of Schools and Colleges on or before December 31st, 2023. So their accreditation is not final before then. They have to notify the state board of their intent to seek accreditation on or before, the notification has to come on or before December 31st, 2023. The notice has to include any progress already made toward accreditation and an anticipated approval date if applicable. The board may request updates of accreditation progress at any time and may conditionally approve the school is eligible to receive public tuition. Moving on to page 21, based on such progress. Failure to obtain full accreditation on or before July 1, 2029 may result in the state board using those revocation, suspension, condition powers that we talked about on the eligibility of an approved independent school to receive public tuition. So this is to account for the fact that I believe you all heard testimony that the accreditation process could take several years. Page 21, section 17, out-of-state school attendance transition. So this bill limits out-of-school tuition pretty significantly compared to what's required now. So the transition provision provides that a student enrolled for the 2022-2023 school year in, or that has been accepted for enrollment for the 2023-2024 school year by an approved independent school in another state or country that would not be eligible to receive public tuition under the changes you're making here. That student shall continue to be entitled to public tuition until such time as the student graduates from that school. So if they're already there, or they're already in, I'm sure that students are applying and accepting enrollment now, right, in the spring for the fall. If they've already there, or they have been accepted for enrollment for next school year, they can continue in that school until graduation. And then section 18, a moratorium on approval of new approved independent schools. Notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, the State Board of Education shall be prohibited from approving an application for initial approval of an approved independent school until further direction by the General Assembly. So this would mean they could still continue to, I think it's every 5 years, I believe. They're looking at approval renewals. This is a moratorium on initial approvals.
If an independent school is already in the application process and they're trying to complete the application process, do we?
This language does not account for that. So
I just have a school in my district that just asked me this question about how long it was going to take, because I guess they're already like 2 years in or something.
to the approval process?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say that this language does not take into account applications that the board is already working on. It's pretty just basic saying no initial approval. So it doesn't take into account, I would say it's not nuanced enough to take into account applications it's looking at but are not complete yet. So.
Probably we should nuance that a little.
Okay. Is there a date you want them to have received the application by?
How about all, who have already notified the state board of their intent pick a date, July 1st, 2024? Yes.
I mean, I guess this might be a policy discussion, but aren't we then sort of opening the door for like a flood of applications to come in before this law goes into effect?
All right, we'll hold on that.
Okay.
Until next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you could sort of think about what you've heard, if you have any suggestions, that would be great.
I mean, the drafting that would be easy. It really depends on what your. Page 22, last page, 19, position development and report. To ensure students attending an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition receive the services they are entitled to, and to assist students who believe they have been unfairly denied admission to an approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition, the Agency of Education shall provide the House and Senate Committees on Education with a detailed recommendation for a public tuition student advocate position. The recommendation shall include a job description, including qualification criteria, the determination of whether a new position would need to be created or whether the duties can be assigned to a current position, and any necessary appropriations to fund the position. And I believe that's a new addition
Yes.
than we've talked about in here. So, any further direction I'm happy to take on this section.
I thought you did a great job. And I'll just, for the committee's sake, this was a suggestion that I received from advocates, period. And so I asked Beth to include it.
And then the effective dates are easy in that, again, there's two separate sections that take effect on different times, and that's to account for that language in section 828 that doesn't come into effect until July 1, 2024. But the whole bill would take effect on July 1, 2023. And that's it.
I know this is going to be in the policy discussion. I just want to throw it out there so I don't forget, and it's kind of on the table. I wonder if we should look at on page 21 to the actual date, failure to obtain full accreditation on or before July 1st, 2029. We know the accreditation process takes about 5 years, and with the possible influx, I don't know if are they going to be able to handle have the capacity to do that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah. Does this give the state board a little bit of flexibility to say we can conditionally approve you if you haven't met the July 1st, 2029 deadline?
No, it allows the state board to conditionally approve if the school approaches them and says, hey, we know we need to do this. We haven't done it yet. We intend to start that. The state board has to have that notice of intent by December 31st, 2023. But as drafted, this says they have to attain full accreditation on or before July 1, 2029.
So maybe we could think about some language that says, something about through no fault of their own cannot meet the deadline, but are, in the process.
And
Yes.
it does go on to say after the July 1st, 2029 may result in the state board using its powers. So in reality, they could make an exception in some way.
Yes, they could, but you're leaving that discretion to the state board. So
We don't want to do that.
that's up to you.
So we could add some more specific language that it would give them the power to conditionally approve somebody who's well within the process, but through no fault of their own, is not going to meet the deadline.
In other words, they've showed progress.
Yeah, well, or like they've submitted everything, but because the accreditation organizations have whatever problem they're having, they aren't just going to be done in time.
Do you want me to make an amendment now or wait for a further discussion?
I think that we'll revisit.
Okay,
Yes, just don't let us forget that one.
it's in red. I always take my committee notes in red.
But I had a definitional question. So if this goes throughout, we refer to approved schools. That necessarily means accredited if this goes through, right?
No. So this bill would require approved independent schools who want to be eligible to receive public tuition to be accredited. But it would not require, well, the state board's own rules, they don't require it, but that is an avenue for that soon. But it would not require every approved independent school. So if the approved independent school did not want to be eligible to receive public tuition, they would not have to be accredited. This bill doesn't require them to. It's only if they want to receive public tuition.
Yeah, I just didn't know if we were changing the definition of the word approved in here,
So this bill does not do that.
Yeah.
It creates a new category. That would be a large policy decision for the committee on whether or not you want to change the entire category of approved independent school.
Are we going to be okay because, right, July 1st, 2023, because of the state board rules, we will move to 3 categories of recognized school, approved independent school, and approved independent school eligible to receive public tuition. And then we sort of are doing the same thing here.
Yes, I think those rules are already in effect.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is moving in that same direction.
Okay. All right, without.
Yep.
And some of you may be asking, why would you choose to be an approved independent school, period, not eligible to receive public dollars? I think by the nature of what the state board has done and what we're doing, it just sort of created it. And a school could choose to do it just for the sake of saying we are an approved independent school. Want to weigh in on that?
So I view this as kind of like a consumer protection. So my old job was at the Office of Professional Regulation. And there were varying levels of regulation of different professions in the state, right? And along with those regulations come different requirements to receive whatever credential you're getting from the state. So I look at this as in order to become an approved independent school, the state board has to get a bunch of information from you, and you have to do a bunch of things. And there's a review process every 5 years, and you are required to do a lot of things in state law that a parent who is paying their own way may want to know all of that is happening in order to say, okay, we want to send our child to a private school. We don't want them to have a public education. What are some of the, what's the state oversight of these schools? And so I look at it as a public protection piece where the state has some amount of control over that approval process. Whereas recognized independent schools, there's also some amount of state control, but it's just kind of like a registry where they're reporting that they're open for business and they meet certain requirements. So there's a lot more state oversight of approved independent schools. And so if they don't want to receive public tuition, but they have a healthy consumer base, then those consumers know that the state board has some amount of oversight over what's happening in that school. It's not the same as a public school, but so that's how I look at it. It doesn't have to be that way. You get to choose. So you could eliminate the difference between approved and recognized. You could say only, you know, there's the only schools that qualify for truancy purposes in the state are approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition. Those are all policy decisions, but all this bill does is say, if you want to get public funds, you got to be approved to do that. And here are the hoops you have to jump through.
Great, thank you very much, Beth. Appreciate it. Something to think about over our break. We'll dive right back into it when we come back.
So no changes at this point.
What did you say?
Oh, I just had asked a question about the dates on the moratorium,
Okay.
but that was like a policy discussion.
I guess not. Or there was some nuance in what you were asking about.
Yes, I mean, I had other questions, but I thought we were, or other suggestions, but I thought we were supposed to.
Yeah,
hold
wait,
on to them.
yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
All right, again, just double checking, we're okay with the memo, I'm gonna get that out.